Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a lovely lunch. This is our final plenary session of the Congress. It's called Keep Cities Moving Towards Mobility Models. In it, we want to talk all things about mobility and how can city leaders better translate current user behaviour towards transport to keep cities moving. I'm going to hand over now to the chair. Paul Krutko is CEO of Arbor SPARK. Arbor SPARK aims to support and grow entrepreneurs and early-stage companies in order to enhance the region's global competitiveness. He's also one of the founders of the American Center of Mobility and vice president of the International Association of Science Parks and Areas of Innovation. So please give a very warm welcome to Paul Krutko.
Well, good afternoon, and it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you and to have the great opportunity to chair this very distinguished panel about our topic about new mobility models. Just want to remind you that, as you've been in other sessions, that the Ask and Vote tool is available to you to craft some questions that later in our program will be able to be asked to this group. Our session today really is focusing on the notion that we're in a very great period of acceleration of accelerations, meaning that all kinds of technologies are moving faster and faster, and these are impacting what we are trying to accomplish in terms of moving people and goods in our community. So what we want to explore is how urban transport policy can better leverage these new and emerging mobility choices in cities, and how can city leaders better translate current user behavior towards the transport that's both sustainable and keeps the city moving, as the title suggests. So joining me today on our panel, to my immediate left, is Ari Dasgupta. Ari is the Global Director for the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities at the World Resources Institute. Next to Ari is Mr. Carlos Moreno. He is the Special Envoy for Smart Cities for the Mayor of Paris. I would love to have that title. That's a good one. He'll have to tell us more about that.
Yeah.
To his left is Mr. Isaac Martín-Barbero. He is with INECO. He's the president based in Madrid. And all the way at the end is Michel Carrillo.
Chaín, Carrillo.
Thank you. He is from Mexico, and he is with the government of the state of Puebla, who will be hosting the Latin American version of this coming up, or the division, I guess is the right way to put it. He's the Secretary of Competitiveness, Labor, and Economic Development. So what's going to happen first is each of the panelists will give a 3-minute long presentation on their thesis, and then we'll follow that with a period of debate, and then your questions. So, Ari, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul. Any one of you who have come to this room must have gone to the exhibition space, and at least half of the exhibitor there is about mobility or what's going to happen to mobility. So one thing we all know, that mobility, as we know, is going to change for multiple reasons, for technology, for services. So that's something we know. Another thing we know is 2.5 billion more people will live in cities, most probably in our lifetime, in the next 35 years. If they're very old people here, I don't know, but most probably all of our lifetime. And the third thing that we know, and these people will live in cities, mostly in the global south, and cities, not mega cities actually, smaller cities and medium-sized cities. That's where the most of the population will go. And the third thing we know, and this is our research showing, I work in an organization, I lead a team of about 250 people that work on cities in global south. specifically about 70, 80 cities every year to help them make solutions all the way to the outcome. That's what we do, help cities get to an outcome on transportation, on urban planning, on energy. And our research is showing that inequality in cities is going to be a critical factor how sustainable cities are. Inequality in cities, actually all kinds of cities, both in global north and south, is growing. Given that these three things to be known, change in mobility, changes in the population growth in cities, and a change in inequality, so the question is, what do we do? The question we have asked ourselves is, how do we make sure this revolution in mobility that's taking place, or about to take place, actually is taking place in a lot of places already, is good for cities and good for the people? The interesting thing right now, the revolution right now, is very much led by businesses, very interesting, innovative businesses. But how do we make sure this is actually good for citizens and for cities? And so what we're doing about it, we've done 2-3 things right now that is of interest to this panel and this discussion. One, we actually did a research of what mobility solutions out there across the world. And as you can imagine, we found a lot of solution on sharing of mobility, solution of innovation on products like seamless mobility, like Oyster cards, for example. What we found is, among the solution, the things that are most effective right now, that is good for the planet and good for people, are solutions that is leveraging existing mobility with new mobility. Things that is helping people to connect the last mile between a train station and bus station to their home. Things that is allowing people to plan their trips, not just in the public transport, but public transport, private, like shared transport, and in the case of Global South, informal transport. Imagine if you had an app that connected you with informal transport to public transport and to shared mobility. That is the ecosystem in the future that is going to be best, that is working right now, and this is going to dramatically change. Our goal is to get the cities ahead of the curve rather than be driven simply by business innovation that's going on. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Carlos?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for coming. Today, November 16th, we have at least two more important reasons to consider that this is an important day today. In fact, when I discussed about mobility. The first one is the COP23 today in Bonn, with many cities, many countries, many activists, many citizens totally engaged in order to develop a new paradigm about a world low carbon. I consider, the city of Paris considers that this is the most important and relevant challenge for the next decades. The mobility today is necessary to consider that in the fight for climate change, to build a city low carbon. Still more, to build a city totally post-carbon. This is today a very significant challenge for the city of Paris. This morning at 11, in the city of Paris, the mayor of Paris, Ms. Anne Hidalgo, with the world community, has launched a new observatory. This is Guapo for the Spanish people. Guapo. Guapo, this is the group for air pollution. This is a new observatory. This is a worldwide observatory about the quality of air in the cities. This is today a very sensitive point because we can observe in cities, in Delhi last week, there is not possible, it's unhealthy. The most important cities in the world have today air unhealthy for human. One of the most important contributors for this bad quality of air, the transportation. It's absolutely urgent to transform our paradigm about transportation of mobility. We have one way, the possibility to develop the new technologies for that. This is technocentric position. We have in Paris another positions. They develop the new usages, the new services, and engaged with us, citizens, in order to transform the urban culture about mobility. It's totally need to transform the vision of citizens to engage the attitude as far as mobility is concerned. In the city of Paris, our main guideline today is how can we build a low-carbon city in respect with the COP21, the COP22, the COP23. Multimodal mobility, electrical bike, electrical car, the public service, recapture the avenue, the streets, and to give to pedestrians, to close the urban highway. The mythical Champs-Élysées Avenue, it is closed when Sunday per month, and only disposal for pedestrians. This is today the possibility to converge with the new technologies. Last week, I finished just, next week, the mayor of Paris will launch the first driverless autonomous shuttle in Paris, because we consider that it's very important to mingle, to mix citizen solutions, engagement of citizens, and technological solutions. We have very important participatory budget. 10% of the budget of the city of Paris is totally dedicated to citizens in order to foster citizens' proposal, including transportation, including new models, including the transformation of our model. I finish. It's very important today to consider the mobility as a service, as a citizen services. It's very important to develop a new urban culture of citizens about how can we transport in the cities.
Great. Isaac, you have the floor.
Yes, well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to the organizers for having us here. Very briefly, I think that mobility and mobilities in cities, considering that the future is going to take place basically in cities, is probably one of the most important aspects that we need to deal with. We are, all of us, these days short of time. We know, just as Carlos mentioned, if there was any need to think about that climate change is a problem. Annie mentioned before how important and how fast it is, the pace of technological change. It's hard to understand the industrialization of the 20th century without considering the transportation sector and the automotive industry, just to mention two. And we are all increasingly worried, as Annie mentioned as well, about global phenomena such as inequality. So we go back and think about any of those, or rather about all of those, we will see that it's very unlikely that we'll manage to tackle them successfully unless we do something dramatically effective in the field of urban mobility. I think we need to go back to the fact that cities were created basically because people wanted to do things together, because people understood that they could get further if they were willing to cooperate. And at the same time, cities tend to grow beyond what some economists or engineers would say the optimal size, or particularly because they need to face up to new realities. So the way in which cities manage to integrate positive externalities with negative externalities, that is the opportunities of having more resources closer to you with the inconvenience of having more pollution or the consequences of having too many people in the same place. I think that that's what, at the end of the day, makes the success or the failure of a city. So I think the panel is very nicely titled as Getting Cities Moving. I don't think we'll get cities moving unless we significantly improve mobility solutions. It's not by chance that basically, as Annie mentioned before, also we were talking about that, waiting there while we were having our micros set, I mean, if you look for a single sector out there, most of them will be dealing with mobility. However, two final thoughts. That needs to be dealt with from a point of view which really puts the citizen at the center. We need to move beyond what's comfortable to do from the supply side, if you are a corporate, or from the bureaucratic side, if you are a public administration. And that requires planning. That requires thinking ahead. And to me, one of the greatest challenges is to see how will you be able to integrate that capacity, that daring to propose things to your citizens, while at the same time remain open to incorporate their suggestions, their feelings, their fears, their aspirations. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's why I think such a topic is so exciting.
Fabulous. Michel?
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Paul, and start with something that you say, that we have to think ahead, to plan ahead in order to manage city. As public policy makers, we have to combine all the inputs that we get from the academy, from the technology, for the enterprises, and try to mix it up in order to make some benefits for the city that are the places where we all live. In that sense, I think it's easier to understand the example of Paris because we all know about Paris, so I'm going to take like 30 seconds in order to explain the troubles or the challenges that we have in Puebla. First of all, we are the fourth largest metropolitan zone of the country in Mexico. We have around 6.2 million inhabitants in the state, but if you draw a circle of 120 kilometers around Puebla, we have 39.5 million inhabitants, and 40% of the national-wide GDP of Mexico is placed there. So it's a huge challenge for logistics. So we have to combine different perspectives. Of course, we have to combine mobility, but we also have to combine it with history. We have we are World Heritage city, according to the UN. We have to combine with competitiveness because the people have to do business. We have to make the economy grow. We have to combine it with inclusion. We want a city that is livable and mobility for everywhere, despite all the restrictions that you might have. And also we have to make all these things environmental friendly. So how we deal with this challenge? In Puebla, we are betting in order to open this kind of discussion to society. Why? Because we cannot longer think that we as government officers have all the answers. There's so much people outside the government that are living in the city every day and they have fabulous ideas. So we have to figure out and find the ways that we have a more constructive conversation with them. So in that sense, we have been working in changing the way we prioritize the infrastructure that we made. In the past, we prioritized automotive. Now our first challenge, the first thing that we have in mind is pedestrians, then bicycle, then public transport, then freight transportation. At the end, we are putting cars and motorcycles. So this is a change of paradigm, and we are getting the transition from design from cars to design from people. And the other things that we are in is open the new things that we're doing. For example, in the public transport, we take all the individuals, companies, and trying to get it together in a kind of corporations that allow us to better planning of the routes and also making more sociable the economic benefits of it. And like Paris, we are closing the main areas of the city in order to make one day of the week only for pedestrians, tourism and pedestrians. But we are not choosing it from the government. We are open to this kind of discussion to the citizens, because at the end, they are the ones that are going to enjoy it, or are the ones that are going to suffer the decisions that we make. So I think that nowadays it's time to open this discussion, and of course, the most important input is not the technology. Sorry, guys. It's not about the academic, but it's about the people that is living in the city and is going from one point to the other. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's very challenging to be able to express your thesis in 3 minutes, so I appreciate how well you all did. We now have a little more time for you to expand on some of your thoughts, and I wanted to kick off that discussion and some of you have already approached it, so I do appreciate that, which is more societal and ethical in nature in regards to your work and your communities. And it grows from one that I've heard in the conferences that are just the technologists, okay? So this is a smart city setting. We have city representatives. We have people who are trying to improve their community, interacting with the technologists. When the technologists are by themselves, there's a lot of focus on what they can do and how they can do it. And we see that presented out in the exhibit hall. So these new mobility technologies and platforms are quickly expanding that what, and how. And they want to deploy them in your cities. But I don't think the why question of deployment is not as well explored. So my question is not what can we do, but what we should be doing. And getting to your point, how are you, each of you, incorporating the views of the citizenry in your community on what the new mobility solutions should be? So bottom up versus top down. So the floor is yours. Who wants to go first?
Should I get started? It's a very, very good question, Paul. I actually think it's an exciting time. It's about what's happening to mobility. And it's happening, I think, because of three things that are happening at the same time. One is the things that are in your pocket, the amount of data that we can transfer and deal with in a nanosecond is just expanding. And that's why we have Ubers of the world and other things of the world. So that allows us to do interactions in a different way, allows us to plan our trip. The second thing is electrification that's going to take place, and it's taking place. And the third is autonomy. All these three things are happening at the same time. The question is, Paul, how are these things going to be good for people, as my friends from Puebla talked about, and for cities? And our judgment from an organization like ours is the more you can connect these innovations to people and cities early rather than later. So we don't want outcomes like London, where they suddenly decided we don't want Uber anymore. Most probably they'll go back there. But we want a conversation between them. So what can we do about it? So first, we can get cities ready for this innovation that's coming and understanding what is the implication of this, because it's not one kind of innovation. They have implication of different, whether you have bike sharing or walkability or shared taxi. One outcome we don't want, we all know, I think, in this panel, and agree, I hope all of you agree, is a single person driving a car anywhere in a city. That's the outcome we don't want. We want cars to be like horses. You have it in the countryside, you go visit it once in a while, but you don't actually commute on it. That's what cars should be. Everything else should be shared, walkable, or bikeable. So that's the future we want. At least the cities I work in Global South, it's not possible to have cars and the cities to breathe and to live. What we are doing is actually helping cities come together. We recently, 10 organizations like mine and some cities came together, put together a kind of a manifesto, not manifesto, 10 principles for shared mobility. It's called Principles for Shared Mobility.org. Basically agreeing what are the common principles cities should have to build policies towards new mobility. It will surprise you that many cities, even the richest cities in the world, doesn't have a coherent strategy yet. Paris may be a little ahead of the curve, yet for shared the new mobility. That's one. The second, actually this innovation that's taking place outside the door allows many new entrants in the market of mobility. That wasn't the case before. This is a very good thing. So mobility was driven by big utilities, big corporations that ran mobility. Now, actually, because of the innovation that's taking place, a lot of new players, a lot of innovative players. So innovation actually is in the mobility space in a different way. So figure out how we can guide that innovation. We ran, I don't know how many of you have been to India, there is a very peculiar vehicle called a rickshaw, which has 3 wheels and a very, very small engine. And everyone kind of makes fun of it. It's actually incredible for last mile connectivity and for poor people to move around. And actually, because of such a small engine, it's not that polluting yet. It could be. But we ran a competition in India. How can you make those rickshaws better? And what we found, the winner of that competition actually created a shared system for rickshaws, got 600 rickshaws together, you could order them on your mobility app, got healthcare for those rickshaw owners. And today in India, if you go to any service, Uber, Ola, the big services, you will see auto rickshaw as an exam option there. So innovation from bottom up is possible, and I think that's what the exciting thing of the future is.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Carlos?
Sure. I think that in the case of Paris, our experience is based on to develop a triple innovation reality. We want to consider the transformation about mobility. Social innovation, technological disruption, and redesign, reinvent urban infrastructures. If I consider social innovation, the most significant point about social innovation is to develop the social acceptability to change. It's very important challenge today because if you want to shift the paradigm is single car, of the use individual car, the use my diesel car, it's necessary to change the urban culture in order to accept an other social behavior. I can use the public transportation, I can use a bike, I can use electrical car and sharing car. It's not my car, it is a shared caring. This is not a real technological barrier. This is in a cultural barrier to decide me change that. This is the first point. How can we develop the social acceptability? How can we develop a new urban culture? How can we accept to shift towards new services and new usages? The second point is the technological disruption, of course, because if we want to develop a new paradigm, it absolutely needs to deliver new services with the new infrastructures. Today, since next 1st January, we have been developing a new bike sharing, it's electrical bike share, because we want to offer to the metropolis of Paris a bike share. That is not possible to have a mechanical only because we extended the services in 10, 15, 20 kilometers. With electrical bike, it's possible to offer a new services if people at the same time change the urban culture. This is the technological disruption when I decided to launch next week the first electrical less driver autonomous shuttle. This is important for users. It's important for the public service. But the public service can say, where are my job? I am driver, and you have now a new service without drivers. It's very important to develop in balance. When we transform with the technical disruptions, this is the services. And the third point is to transform, to radically change the urban infrastructures. Today, it's not necessary the popular decisions. And we discuss about how can we engage the citizens, how can we involve the citizens. When you decided to close an urban highway, you have many people that are unhappy. This is the balance about what is the decisions to transform in middle and long term, what is the decisions to change in the short term. This is absolutely needs to have at the same time pedagogical attitude, training attitude, to discuss with people, because to transform the streets in pedestrian is very nice for people who lives in this area, but it's not necessarily the best solution for the people who crossed this region. I think that when we decided to reinvent infrastructures, it's very important to develop a new attitude towards citizens, the collaboration. In the city of Paris, we have decided to develop a co-creation team with people. Today, we have decided to transform the 7 iconic squares, the Bastille, Nation, République, the very important squares. These squares have been built to cars. And today, we transform that to people, to pedestrians. The method I have used is to develop a co-creation, co-design with citizens. We have been created different teams in association of people with the new technologies by internet, by web, in order to collect different proposals. And today, we have been implementing different solutions from citizens in order to transform these squares.
Great, thank you. Isaac, so again, remind you, the question is, how are we engaging the citizenry in terms of this, engaging in the solution development about what we should do, not just what we can do?
Thank you, Paul. Well, I think that Carlos is very, very right to mention that we need to get them to accept things, because that's the first stage in order to get them engaged in the actual change. And citizens become engaged by participating in the market. By the way, we're also in the domain of mobility. There is an increasing disappearance of the line between service providers and customers, as we all know, not least because of some of the phenomena that Annie mentioned. But indeed, also allow me to go back on something that Michel said and tell him that I fully agree with him. Technology will certainly not be the solution, because first we need the citizens to buy into the concept, to engage actively into the concept. Then we need institutional designs that create channels for that participation. And indeed, that shouldn't be that difficult at an age when we are all claiming for more co-responsibility, co-creation, co-design, as Carlos mentioned. However, it is difficult to do. We've recently witnessed some experiences in Spain whereby citizens had been asked on their opinions about certain urban projects and to vote for them. And I think it's fair to say that the authorities that gave them that opportunity are probably not as happy as they thought they would be in terms of massive participation. So because I don't want the same thing to happen to us, allow me to take the advantage of this opportunity to ask any of those here, as well as anyone who might see us, for a few minutes of their time in participating in something that has a lot to do with what we're discussing today, which is the Ministry for Public Works Innovation Plan. It is a plan that has been publicized and let known to the public on the 8th of this month, which will be on the web until the 8th of next month, so that's 1 month. It has four axes, 21 lines, 67 initiatives, and we want the people's opinion. And that plan deals with the user's experience, it deals with intelligent platforms, it deals with intelligence routes, it deals with energy efficiency and the promotion, and all of those just for the transportation sector, so very much related with mobility. And so please, www www.fomento.es/innovación, so innovation in Spanish. We will be thrilled to have, because we have a low conversion rate, I must be honest. So many people go into, they take a look, but we don't have that many suggestions. So that's an opportunity to create. And as I was saying, I think it's very relevant. One last word as well in relation with economics, with mobility, and with cities. Economics is about resource allocation, and it's about resource mobilization. Probably the mobilities in cities is one of the biggest challenges that we now have for those two things to happen. So mobility is about climate, technology, but it's also about wealth creation. And good mobility solutions are solutions which also bring opportunities, bring jobs, and bring new horizons to the citizens.
Okay, how to engage the people? Well, I have a few points. First of all, we have to be realistic. If we get this discussion from the academic perspective, we could say we have to reduce the journeys. But when we translate that to the everyday life of the citizens, they say like, I'm not going to change where I live in order to be closer to my job, or I'm going to be closer to my school. So we have to understand that there are some restrictions that we have to deal with. So if we want to engage people and we start with these very hard positions, we are going to scare them. So we are not going to get that. Second point that is important to take in account, it's about, once again, innovation. Yes, we know that the trend is going to electricity. But then, how are we going to make all this innovation, all these technological advances accessible for all the people despite the economical level? Because if we don't take in account not only economics, but the economy itself, what we're going to do with all this technology is growing the gap that we currently have between those people that have all the chances and all the opportunities and those people that are leaving behind. So we have to figure out how to make this discussion about mobility and technology one open window for those people that are fostering or are looking for economic growth and social advantages, because otherwise we're going to stretch the inequalities that we, despite if we are in Europe, in America, or in Latin America, the inequality that we have in our societies. Third point, and it's a very pragmatic one, we have to rethink and redesign the way three factors combine: the number of vehicles, the parking lots, and the public transportation. Because if we take any of these 3 points aside from each other, we have a non-holistic solution and a non-holistic way of aborting this thing. And the last point I want to stress is a very inspirational one, but I think is at the end one very important. We have to help people to enjoy the cities. Because if the citizens doesn't know their city, doesn't know the opportunities that the city offers to them, not only about job creation, not only about economy, not only about the everyday life, but how you can really live and enjoy your city, you are not going to have the interest to spend part of your time in getting into discussion. You are going to take a step back, and it's going to be only a discussion of the experts. And the experts are not the national-wide or the city-wide spectrum of the opinions. So we have to help the people to go out of their houses and enjoy the cities, because otherwise we are going to have an incomplete participation.
Okay, so we have about 22 minutes left in our session, and I just want to encourage you, if you haven't submitted a question, we're going to take those in a minute. I'm not going to direct this question to each of you to respond. If you have a take on this, give me an answer. There's a body of thought when you're in this setting that the development of the technologies are going to ultimately be a positive good. In other settings, there's a worry, there's the dystopian view of connected and autonomous vehicles transporting goods and people. that you mentioned cities at an optimal size, that comment, and that they grow beyond that. There is a dystopian view that says the introducing of these new technologies will exacerbate sustainability problems. So people will choose to live further away if they're not responsible for driving. That we will have more sprawl. There's a further view, if there's autonomous vehicles, that there will be even more congestion in the cities. So just curious, not picking on any of you, do you have a view on that? And how might we make sure that we get the positives rather than the negatives? Any of you?
Well, I think that is about my profession. I made my major in economics, but I think that the size of the city is not defined because of the mobility criteria. It's more about economics. Why? Because if you live further away from the downtown, but still, because of your income and because of the opportunities that you get, at the end of the day, your value of the money that you spend moving is valuable. You decide that it's better for you to get all this distance in order to get a good job. All the mobility policies are not going to fight that logic. So at the end, in order to get this optimum criteria of the size of the city, we have to create opportunities. Opportunities that are inside of the city, because otherwise we are not going to fight against the market. If we learn something for the 20th century, is that almost every time that the policymakers go against the market, the policymaker lost. So we have to take this dimension in account in order to figure out these kind of sizes.
If I just may pick up from what you just said, on your question of technology, all three of my colleagues here have said technology is not enough. It's absolutely right. That's not enough. But at the same time, I think just shying away from it is also not the right answer. It is happening, and I think it can be turned towards good. Today, I'm going to give you frightening statistics. Today, there are more cell phones in the world than toilets. Which is, think about it for a minute. Do you think toilets are more important than cell phones, or cell phones are more important? The reason it is because this is an innovation that percolates. It's actually the market. That's like today in India, you can buy a smartphone, not just a cell phone, for $50 or less. Yours one, I'm sure, costs much more than that if you don't have one from India. So the question is not that technology is good or bad. The question is, are we going to use it for the betterment of cities and its people? And the question is, how do we get ahead of the curve and not be a recipient of the technology, but actually a progressive wanting the technology to solve problems? I actually think it's possible, but I think cities have to do more to get ready for it, and citizens have to get ready for it, which is, I think, the most interesting question both of you raised. Because it is a different way of living, different way of sharing, and different way of consuming cities that we are looking for. And I do think that not enough work is happening in the world of what citizens and people's behavior changed, as we talk about in the world. And I would encourage, I'm very keen to encourage us to hear more about what can we do more to bring, as you said, citizens have to enjoy cities for it to be successful. But remember that historically, if you look at cities on the history of cities, cities were created about 10,000 years ago. And they were created for two reasons. One, to increase productivity, and second, to increase quality of life. And both these things have been true for most of the time, except, I think, the last 100 years when cars were introduced. That cities have become difficult. They're full of big highways, cars, and congestion, and things like that. But also, another fact is true. In 1900, when the last century started, 1980s, 1990, there were horses on the street. There were no cars. In 20 years, by 1920, 25, all the horses were gone, and there were only cars. That transition took very quickly. So now it's up to us to make sure the cars get away from cities in less time. So what I'm saying is behavior change is possible. History has shown us that it is possible. It's just that we haven't found yet the methods that we need. And you talked about dystopian future of...
I didn't say it was my view.
I know,
said
you,
it was-
about people living far away because they have autonomous cars. And I think your point, cities don't get built just because of transportation. Cities get built because we want to live there, because we want to interact with the people, because that causes interaction, causes innovation, and the innovation's got economic growth. And because we want to enjoy the city, we want to do things in the city. So I actually do not see a future because of autonomous car, people living very far away. I see people living in compact, dense cities without cars, with much more open area, much more walkability, much more interaction with people that's going to happen, which will make the cities more productive, more carbon neutral, hopefully, and equal. So that everyone in the citizens can actually enjoy the benefit of the city, not only culturally, but educationally, but open air and open parks. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to bring to the table one additional perspective regarding the relationship between technology and inequality. Yes, there certainly is a risk with an increased focus on technology, or at least we seem to claim there is, that we could widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. But that might happen in the future, but for a minute, let's take a look at what has happened in the past. The truth is that the introduction of rich and extensive metro networks in Europe has actually played a major role. It's been one of the most inclusive vectors in decades. Basically, because people, even when cities are crowded, they tend to come to cities because that's where they can find the opportunities. And a major expense that they need to put up with, it's basically living somewhere, whether it's renting or buying something. So just by extending the coverage of the metro railways, we have actually been in some, I can think of Barcelona, Madrid, several examples here in Madrid, but I mean throughout the continent, probably this is a continent where we have the widest so far metro system, where really mobility and new technologies in the field of mobility, together with good solutions in terms of institutional design, that is, for example, the creation of metropolitan authorities in everything that has to do with mobility, that is taking into account the fact that many people come into the city and get out of the city on a daily basis, and that therefore connectivity, we call it today, interoperability. Maybe when those authorities were created 30 years back, they used to call it some other way. Basically, it was being able to get off the bus and catching a train. Okay, that really has put a cap on the increasing difficulties that many people had when it came to accessing to housing. So therefore, I think we need to take an eclectic view when it comes to the dangers, because in the past, at least, technology has often meant an increase in inclusiveness. Second, something that was mentioned also regarding the utopians versus dystopian alternatives, talking about congestion, somehow we get a road that is overcrowded, and then we make 2 or 3 extra lanes, and those lanes are, again, jammed in very little time. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we tend to answer new questions with the old answers until we come up with a new answer. We never came to think of car sharing. I mean, 20 years back when we were increasing the number of lanes, we never came to think about dynamic tolling when it comes to the use of roads. And I think that certainly we will see in 20 or 30 years' time a refurbishing of the urban landscape, because our cities have been built and developed to have cars under the premises that everyone should own their own car. So we also have there an issue that we will have to deal with when it comes to the recovering of the public space. What are cities going to be looking like in the future? But all that boils down to the fact that we have been talking for years about transportation as a sector. We increasingly see transportation, well, we saw then transportation as solutions, then we've moved on to mobility as a service. We talk about mobility. Who was talking about mobility 15 years ago? Not that many people. Today it's mobility, no longer transportation. Well, the way we see things is that we need to go beyond that and to talk about mobility as a system, whereby we have co-creation solutions, considering that people, as I said before, are suppliers and are users themselves, that it has impact on the way we understand urbanism, in the way we understand political participation, and that we need to redefine mobility from the perspective of the private citizen. Again, not from the perspective of the service provider.
Very good. So we're at the 10-minute mark. There's 3 questions from the audience so far. 2 of them are more, I would guess, quick hitting, just your opinions. So one is an anonymous question that said, many cities have launched car-free days once or twice a month. Is that a sustainable approach? Any thoughts on that?
For the system app. I want to share our experience about it in Paris, because the sustainable city is one of the most important points today in the next years and decade in Paris. If I want to relate sustainable city on the solution for mobility. And in reality, the question can be to be in a car, not to be in a car, to be in a public transportation, not to be in a public transportation. In reality, we have a most important question. Why people have been used car or public transportation to commute, to move? What is the reason for people should to move many kilometers from one point to another point? And in fact, the city of Paris is a small city, 2 million inhabitants. The metropolis of Paris is today almost 7 million people. The region of Paris is almost 9 million people, sorry. And we have the public transportation from the people who live in the east to go to the west to work. 1 million persons per day use the railway, the train on the underground. This is the heritage of the vision of the monofunctional city, with many centralized. People live in east, and some people work in west. It's compulsory to commute 1 hour or more. And our vision for the next decade is to transform this concept, to develop the polycentric city, to develop the new pole to live, to work, to have access to leisure, to culture, to education, to universities, for kids, the urban parks, the urban areas. If we transform our vision of the functional city, and the people live, the people work, the administration, for a new paradigm with the multiple poles, we can develop a new chrono-urbanism. This is the concept of the city of 15 minutes. The target is offer the possibility to all citizens to have 15 minutes around, the possibility to have access to essential needs, essential services, to work, to live, culture, leisure, and other. And automatically, we can reduce the commute for people. We have today in the region of Paris all days, 500 kilometers of traffic jam. 500 kilometers every day. Because we don't have another possibility. I live on the east of Paris. I'm working in the west. If you have another system with improve the public transportation, it's okay, it's better. But this is not the real solution because we have this need. Why? I need to commute 1 hour, or 40 minutes. If we can transform the paradigm, we can develop a polycentric city, we can change. This is today the vision of the city of Paris. We develop today new workplaces in cities. We mixed district with center of innovation, social housing, building for works, universities, incubator, startup. This is the politic of arc of innovation. We have decided to implant in diverse places different services to offer multiple services in order to have in 50 minutes. The Olympic Games in 2024, this is the first time we have developing the Olympic game in 10 minutes. All participants in the Olympic Games will be the possibility to have only 10 minutes to access for the sites of competition. And just after the Olympic game, this area will become a social housing, a new eco-district, a new eco area to transform for social housing, working, innovation, incubator, university, and urban park.
All right, you had, you wanted
I
to
just
respond?
wanted to answer the question quickly.
Yeah, the question was
we actually
3
support
days.
a lot of Carfree drays in different countries. In India, we started in 2.5 years back. Now 30 cities are part of the program. And I think that more than anything else, it makes a big political point of that cities' streets are not just for cars. It basically blocks up a main street and allows biking, walking, singing, dancing, whatever. It's not a long-term solutions of anything. It's actually making a simple point that city streets is a very big asset for the city. It's not only for people who own cars. And most of the cities in Global South, car ownership is still at 12%, 14%, 18%. So imagine a majority of open space in cities are basically being used only by 12% or 14% of the population. So it's a bigger political point, and it has a huge impact in the cities we work on.
Very good. That's a very good and excellent response. So the next two questions, and we have 3 minutes, are really very broad. So if you could quickly respond on them, maybe we can get all of your answers in. There's a question that is the public sector the appropriate entity, player, to push forward the new mobility solutions? And I think that what's implied in this question is that maybe the private sector is not the best to do that. So your comments on that. As I said, it's a broad philosophical question. So we have 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
We have a public sector right here.
I think it is related to the way you design your whole government. You can take this as an isolated solution. In the case of Puebla, what we did was a mixture. So we have a ministry that combines infrastructure and mobility. Why? Because we want to put the mobility criterion to have these ideas of the whole street and to place the pedestrian on the first place of all the new infrastructure that we as a state create. So that way we are trying to guarantee that all the hard things that we do and are going to last for the next 20 years or the next 25 years, get in this logic and take into account all the mobility criteria. Because otherwise, if you put the mobility as a single ministry or as a single office, they don't have the seats in order to force the other public sector actors to get in this logic. So in this way, with this solution, we get all the buildings, all the infrastructure, also the money. It gets in the same logic, and of course, all the knowledge is the way that we figure it out. But at the end, it depends of the way government work in different places in the different part of the world.
Can I make a 30-second comment?
Yeah.
Just building on that. Sorry.
No, please, Annie, after you.
There is no question in my mind. I mean, everyone has said that we have to build cities that are good for people, not for technologies, right? That's I think that's been consistent. There is no question that the future of the city, whatever future it is, needs to be decided by society itself, elected representative society, or otherwise, whatever. When you say public sector, I just want to build on what you said. If it's just a transport department,
Correct.
that's not, I mean, people have already said it's a system. It's a future of the city. Mobility is a system. My advice to cities has always been, you can't think about mobility as a sector. You have to think about a city level. So I absolutely think public needs to be part of
Public.
it.
So take off the sector and have public. Is that right? Okay, well, we're at the end of our session. And just to sum up, I think what you've heard from our panelists is the very real need to understand at the beginning what you want to do at a system level that is completely engaged with the values of the community that you're working in. I think we've heard some very interesting solutions. I'm very pleased to compliment Paris on taking advantage of the Olympics, as Barcelona did, as we all learn as we travel around here, that it's a great opportunity to do transformational things. So I look forward to coming to Paris and seeing that. I want to ask all of you to join me in thanking Ari, Carlos, Isaac, and Michel for their excellent presentations today, and I'm sure they will be available afterwards if you want to engage with them in any additional dialogue. So thank you very much.
Thank you.